Yo, 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 what is good, guys? Welcome to Wyckoff Sundays, episode 11. All right, it is a new week. It is currently April 5th. All right, we're going to be obviously starting off reviewing, all the previous trades that we were speaking about on Wyckoff Sundays last week. See what played out, see what didn't, see what we could have done better, and see what we can look going into the future for all of the major pairs that we like to be looking at, right? So first and foremost, we're going to start off with the review. All right, so I got Wyckoff Sundays episode 10 here. Honestly, we were a little bit all over the place when we did this, so I'm going to try my best to follow along with what we were going through. But basically, first thing, obviously, we always want to speak about is dollar. We spoke about a couple of key levels on dollar, some key price action, especially on the bigger time frames. Again, typically with Wyckoff Sundays, we like to look all the way up until like around the 4 hour, 2 hour max for our zones. And so basically what we kind of noticed was weekly time frame wise last week, right? The previous week, we saw the market really sweep below lows, kind of showing us that there could potentially still be bullish intent because again, we have buyers, getting stopped out and sellers that have not been stopped out as of yet, right? So looking for that to basically, continue. And then we have, that on the weekly, right? And then we were looking and kind of scaling in and going on to the daily time frame and noticing how what we had here on the daily was a really nice, institutional down candle, right? So, the same one that went ahead and kind of swept the low of the previous week. That's where we swept the low of that week, right? And so we kind of focused in on this zone here within this daily down candle to look for dollar to go ahead and come down and then go ahead and close in a bullish fashion and react from that area, right? So that was really the idea we had going into the week on dollar. And obviously, as we can see, that is exactly what ended up playing out, right? So we can see right here on the daily, right? This is our daily down candle that we spoke about in that area, right? When we look at the weekly, I mean, the weekly was a little different. We anticipated this to close bullish and really get, close above the highs. In this case, we didn't get that. We kind of just like traded down, reacted from the zone, but we didn't close super strong on the weekly, right? But just because we didn't close strong on the weekly doesn't mean in the future we won't, continue to break the highs. We'll see how things go. We'll talk about that in a bit though. But yeah, basically, we ended up, basically, pretty much pointing out the perfect zone, right? I mean, truthfully, this daily down candle here was where, we had the market go ahead and trade up, right? And we went ahead and looked for the push back down to go ahead and go along on that, right? So yeah, that's pretty much what we were looking for dollar, right? It was just a quick move down to then go ahead and go bullish, right? And you can see that's exactly what ended up playing out, right? Now we spoke about some other pairs as well inside of the same idea. So firstly, we spoke about Euro USD. And Euro USD, what we kind of noticed was, we hadn't yet taken out the low of this trap candle. Oh, sorry, of the distribution. I mean, we had the weekly time frame also kind of creating a trap candle, just like we were looking at with dollar, and like again, barely seeing us sweep the high of that zone. And so with EU, kind of what we wanted. I mean, I personally wanted to see this where the market would kind of like sweep through the highs. We obviously didn't end up getting that. We ended up really just seeing the market hold the previous highs, and kind of give that same reaction down, right? So this is kind of that same relative daily candle as dollar when we look at Euro USD is this zone here, right? And so again, price just really trading up into there and seeing a pretty good reaction. We still have not broken below 1.140. So honestly, I really do expect this week for us to go for that. But again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to stick to just the overview of what we were saying for last week. So didn't quite get what we wanted on EU. So that when it came to like looking for the dollar buys, I didn't end up using EU. We ended up using UJ. And like, we spoke about how, UJ really had some really nice down moves, right? So we had this big push to the downside there, big push to the downside here, right? And like again, like just really showing signs of manipulation in those pushes down before we came higher. So I was just looking for again that same thing to happen. So we did take the trade here. I am still currently in this trade. So I'm hoping for this trade to continue to grow coming into next week. Obviously we did take partials and everything like that. But yeah, I am expecting this to continue to push into next week. So only time will tell. All right, only time will tell. We spoke about GU. We spoke about the fact that we had, some points of order flow here, right? So like we had like price trading back up into previous zones before kind of selling off. We were expecting price to get back down towards these levels on GU. And we were kind of hoping that we could get back up into this red zone. Unfortunately, we didn't get that far. We did pull up close. So let's go to GU here, right? So we could see that, at the time of that picture, I think we're like right over here, basically. Yeah. Sundays. Oh yeah, around here, right? So we basically went ahead and, closed. The market went ahead and closed there. And so we kind of pointed out this zone, right? Instead of us coming all the way there, we can see we actually just traded back into the order flow of that same candle that we showed that went back into that area. So pretty interesting stuff there to see. Again, just a small pullback, and then we went ahead and went down. So yeah, like again, this is kind of our target for GU. It does look like we can potentially reach there. We'll see, right? But yeah, there was GU. That was our idea with EU there, to just kind of align with dollar. And now we had gold, right? So let's talk about what we were looking for gold last week. So what we pointed out with gold on Wyckoff Sundays last week was that overall the structure was looking much more bullish than it was bearish. The evidence was looking a lot better when it came to looking for the longs on gold. So let me see if I could find exactly where we spoke on that. The buy scenario where we've kind of broken the potential redistribution. Yeah, it's best to just play the order flow. It might have been earlier that we spoke about it. Let's see, we spoke about dollar there, we spoke about EU, AU, and here's gold. Right? Like obviously this area that came into the bigger time frame zone. Here we see the market sweep through all these lows before making a new high, right? Then we see the market get back into that area, right? Manipulating again, right? Again, like seeing these lows here get taken, these lows here get taken, right? We end up reacting up, retesting, and continuing, right? So it kind of does, for me, favor like evidence-wise for us to actually go ahead and break 4,600, right? And then maybe even get another impulse, higher towards like, kind of correcting, the imbalances that are made up here. Maybe like, again, like this area was where we really wanted to see sales from last week, was here, right? So definitely that's going to be a first target for me. And we'll go ahead and see what happens. So yeah, that's really that, right? So as you guys heard, that was really what we were thinking, was that the most likely scenario was that this high here at 4,600 was going to get hit, and that we would target this potential order block here to go ahead and go ahead and see price trade into, right? So that was just a target, and obviously we could see that this is where the market reopened here, right? We saw the market trade back down, get back down into order flow there, react beautifully, trade down again, get back down into these lows again, react beautifully, trade back down. Like really, really nice structure. Plenty of opportunities to buy here on gold, to just kind of align with that weekly bias there. So yeah, again, just we definitely caught the right move for the week, when it came to gold. And we stuck to that bias that we were thinking from then, right? So price ran for about, what is that, 3,700 pips, right? So almost 4,000 pips on gold, from the levels that we were talking about. And again, it's really just following manipulation and following structure, right? We pointed out how we saw these lows here, right, all get taken by this huge down move there, right, creating a new high. We came back down into that same area, and what do we do again? We're sweeping again, right? Sweeping here again, new high, retest, new high, retest, new high, retest, and then we just do the structure, right? So really, really nice buys there on gold, and we pretty much said the same thing on silver. What we mentioned was the fact that we had these relatively equal highs that were sitting here on silver, and that could end up being a really good target for us. And then obviously the market opened, we had a pullback, and then we started to, walk our way higher, right, to go ahead and head towards those relatively equal highs, right? So as you guys can see, let's see, where's gold or silver? Yeah, so we spoke about those highs, better for long. So we got to see. So yeah, I think we were just speaking there, like really just about the equal highs, and the fact that we could probably end up seeing silver also retest those areas, and then boom, right? Obviously for the rest of the week, market structure going bullish, right? To then go ahead and reach up towards those highs, right? So from that zone that we marked up here, price ran for about, well, actually, I don't even, how many pips would that be? Like 600 or 6,000? Not even sure for silver, to be honest. But yeah, that is again really the move that we were looking for. So gold and silver were beautiful. Like I said, currency we used UJ this week, and then dollar was beautiful as well. Now, next thing we spoke about was indices, right? So indices, we had things like NASDAQ, things like US 30, and really what we spoke about was the potential of, okay, can we actually be wrong about this? Because what we had been saying on previous Wyckoff Sundays was, obviously we hadn't broken order flow, which is true. We hadn't broken through. This is really the low that really brought us up. And, we hadn't been really been, trading below those levels. And so we were kind of thinking like, all right, well, is it possible that, we end up seeing things like NASDAQ, things like US 30 long term start to reach down towards these lows here, which are the tariff lows. So that's kind of the possibility that I felt like we had to explore again because I felt like we hadn't been exploring it enough over the last couple of weeks. And we definitely could have caught some really good moves, I think, just looking for the shorts if we had been, just kind of following the war narrative. But that being said, again, it's like when I look at like like what we had spoken about last time was like when I look at like really, manipulations that happen, right? Like for example, this is when tariffs started. This is when tariffs ended last year, right? Well, they didn't really end, but when that stopped being a narrative for the market, we had that push down, right? So, when it came to what's it called? Like that push to the downside there, we can see how fast, we can see how impulsive it is. We can see it's like, it's really not, like consolidating that much at all as we're going down. It's very much trending, right? Here, it was so choppy, right? Honestly, like it was just a little bit almost too easy, I guess you could say, to be honest. And so that was kind of why I was so skeptical the whole time of these highs and like the fact that really all it takes is like one sweep and then we just, end up going, right? So, when it comes to this coming week, I don't really feel too sure about a direction, if I'm being completely honest. The reason for that being that obviously since last week happened, right? So let's kind of mark up where last week was. So the market opened right here, right? We finally kind of started to think like, okay, can we start to see selling happening again? And then we end up getting the first bullish week, in the last couple of, why is that wick so far down? Oh, this is my thing there. Okay, yeah. So we get like the first bullish week in like the last couple of weeks, right? So like when it comes down to it, like with this idea here with NASDAQ, I mean, the reason why, even though we had a bullish week, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to start switching back to buys. I don't really think I can because we haven't really broken through much, right? When we really look at it, we're just back inside of a previous zone, right? There's more zones over here as well that we can easily react from if we decide to like sweep or anything like that. So, honestly, like I'm not really bearish. I'm not really bullish. I just want to try and play inside of extreme areas, right? So, if there's like, for example, still liquidity to attack to the upside, like maybe these equal highs here, right? And we end up pulling back here, or we end up going even deeper, right? Like I can maybe still kind of look for longs to head towards liquidity. Or if we start to build up liquidity to the downside and then we go up, right? Then maybe then I can go ahead and look to target the equal lows or, whatever other lows are happening in the market there, right? So right now I'm kind of taking like a bit of a wait and see approach with the indices. I don't think I took a single indices trade last week. So I'm taking a little bit of a wait and see approach with these guys. Because truthfully, it's like obviously the narrative and the idea behind like the war and like all this stuff is that, indices would be quote unquote bearish, right? But I also just, understand that I don't think that that's going to be a long-term thing, right? I don't think this is going to be like a huge down move or like anything like that. That's personally not what I'm expecting. So because of the fact that I'm not really expecting like a huge down move, it's like I'm still bullish. I'm just waiting for like this pullback to really finish. So whether this pullback really finishes around here, right, or whether it comes lower, that's really what I'm looking for, right? One thing that we mentioned last week is, this price level here, which is right around where Trump took office in 2025, right? And as we said, like Trump, the stock market is like one of the most important things, for him and for the people around him, right? So, if there's going to be something, if there's going to be something that really like, if there's going to be something that he's really going to make a priority, it's typically the stock market, right? Like even when it crashed during tariffs, like, it was really just an opportunity to get in. And I think that's really the same thing that, we're going to be seeing. I do expect the market to continue to go bullish in general, despite the war and all this. So that's personally still where I am at, right? And if we do end up seeing something like that, like a pullback down into these previous lows, I think it would be, really, really a good opportunity for us to potentially look for a long-term, like move for us, right? Where, we don't necessarily, like need to like find the bottom to do that, right? We can see breaks, right? We can see breaks happen and then pullbacks, right? Because if we do get substantial moves up, I think we're just going to continue to boom it. So I'll probably just look for reaccumulation plays to go in there, right? So let me see here. The end of Trump's deadline for Iran is 10:05 Monday morning. So if that holds, that could move the markets a lot in either direction, depending on the outcome. Well, we'll see how that goes. I mean, I don't even know, man. I don't even know. Truthfully, like, I don't know if I'm skeptical of a deal right now. You know, but we'll see. We'll see how it all goes down, honestly. Like again, like I said, I think it's just better to take a wait and see approach. And we'll see what the markets end up doing from there, right? But one thing I will say is, we did have this push to the downside that happened, right? But that being said, like, again, this is liquidity that we marked up from last week as well. I don't really expect us to react from there, I think, right? Like I think we made perfectly equal lows here, or no, we didn't know. We just barely swept these internal lows here. I guess like we did take some liquidity, right? Maybe that does hold there, but I kind of do see this whole move up here, as potential liquidity. So maybe we do end up getting one more push down, right? If that's the case, I mean, like again, we did have one weekly up candle, right? If this were the intention to bring us down here, we would see some kind of candle like this, trap in some buyers, right? Maybe we end up coming a little higher to start the week, and then from there we look for the sell-off, right? I think that that could also be the case because if this next weekly candle ends up like, like coming down, I mean, it would look very clean to be like a potential trap candle to maybe create institutional candles like down in these levels, or even just to continue the trend down towards these levels, right? So short term wise, because of these lows, there, right, with Nasdaq and stuff like that, because of we do have other zones as well on US 30, like, we have this extreme low here that hasn't really been mitigated, right? All the rest of these lows that we're in now have already been mitigated. We've already seen price, trade back into them, react, trade back into them, react, trade back into them, react. So to see a higher time frame bottom get set without sweeping all of those lows, right? Once I start to see lows like these get attacked, I'm expecting all of them to get attacked, right? So I'm thinking like right here, right? Like below that level, it probably makes sense as well, right? So, it's a little like I said, I'm taking a wait and see approach, but when it comes to like me really wanting to see the bottom happen, I still think that there's more lows that can get hit out. I still think that there's, like a chance that we could just see a weekly trap candle and then the next candle becomes the bullish move, right? But again, we really depends on what ends up happening, right? But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, we've had a couple of bullish days. That doesn't necessarily mean the trend has shifted yet. When we start to see price trade above, create some strength, and then we can go ahead and wait for, pullbacks back down into levels, then I'll be more confident with indices, right? Anyways, guys, I kind of did both there. I spoke about the future and the past of what we were looking for, but that's fine. So we have indices and then lastly crypto. I actually don't remember what we spoke about for crypto here. Buy zones and I did end up catching a nice BTC buy later in the week. In terms of if I'm convinced that can continue, not really. But yeah, we'll go ahead and see where I spoke about this last week. If I did. Right. It's so careful, obviously that's right. But yeah, so cool. So that's really the idea there. All right. For indices, right? Potential tariff lows retests honestly are looking more and more, right? So BTC, right? We spoke about some potential buys from this level here. If we didn't see buys from this level, then we were looking to we'll go to the font. You guys can see, I mean, what the hell, right? Dollar regardless. Well, it doesn't look like your pairs, right? So I know I did a mix of both. And normally I'm supposed to stick to the review and then we go into this week. I know I kind of did a mix of both, but let's kind of go ahead and start off this being okay, so I think yeah, I don't think we talked about crypto last week, to be honest. Looks like that with the fact that we have gold and yeah, right? Now we're looking at NZD CAD, yeah. So yeah, I don't think we even looked at crypto at all. Maybe that's fine. We'll go ahead and talk about again, we'll skip that. I mean, I guess we didn't speak about it at all for this coming week. So yeah, that's fine. We'll see what what ends up happening there, right? But yeah, so let's go ahead and now tap into again what we can see happen for this coming week. So that's kind of the review of everything we spoke about last week. We did get into indices a little bit in terms of what we can see for this week. So I'm not going to speak on that again, but we're going to start off with dollar. Okay, guys. So, dollar, obviously, for me, still looking pretty bullish. Until we've really broken order flow, there's no reason for me to really look for, shorts. That being said, though, like obviously what we can always do is like really look at the price action inside of extreme areas, in case that, obviously, the narrative changes, right, in those zones, right? So obviously here we do have like, a pretty decent zone, where sellers like, obviously were introduced, right? We had price sweeping through the highs, right? Creating a distribution up top here, right? I believe lower time frame wise, we see like, the five phase is actually playing out at the top, right? So we have the sweep right there, with the gap up, and then, we break down and then we retest, right? So this could end up being an area where we could potentially look for short-term sells or even long-term, depends on what happens. But like obviously right now I'm still pretty bullish on it, but like if we can kind of hold these highs the way that we have been, and then from there like look for a sweep or something, that could be a zone that we could look for. But for me personally, like again, that's me playing devil's advocate, right? That's not me like saying, all right, this is what we're going to be doing, or like acting off of. For me personally, like I'm still bullish on this, which is why I'm still in USD buys at the moment. It's the only trade I'm in right now. And, I do think that, we could potentially see re-entries this week from the idea from last week, right? So I ended up buying, UJ somewhere around here relative to dollar, something like that. And so, like, my entries are basically down here, right? But, if we can see price go ahead and retest down towards, like, break those lows, right? Get back into these area of imbalance over here, maybe even get back into order flow that's unmitigated, right? We do have a zone here that we could see dollar, react from, to bring us back to the upside if we decide to hold order flow. So yeah, if we like hold these highs and then we end up like pulling back, I could honestly see this being a good buy setup for us to take advantage of. We'll see how that ends up going from there, right? Now, there's that. Okay, so yeah, so really that's really the two main zones I'm going to be looking at for dollar is going to be this imbalance zone here and this extreme high here that we did see break the high over there, right? It did create like a big move down, so obviously we'll still pay attention to this area. But because that big move down got engulfed pretty quickly, like I said, my personal bias is that we go ahead and buy, right? I'm sticking to the buys. I'm letting that runner go until we really break highs. If we don't break highs, then that runner will end up obviously just getting stopped at break even for me. But yeah, that's really for me, like what I expect to happen this week is going to be for dollar to really have another bullish week and head to the upside, right? We can see that last week was like slightly bearish. We did obviously close as a down candle, but pretty much we closed right where we opened as well. So I do think that that's kind of almost like a trap candle type of thing that we've gotten with the last weekly close. So seeing the next candle be bullish, I think could make sense. So it's like, okay, can we kind of look to create a bottom wick on that weekly, so that we can go ahead and see the next long take place, like maybe from those levels there would be kind of ideal. Maybe we even sweep one more time and hold this low, right? I would still expect this low to hold in general, right? But either one could really happen. We could sweep the low of the trap and then go, or we could, hold the zone there and then go. That's kind of my favorite ones. And then obviously, if we end up making a higher high, I'm expecting that to continue to go. If we get into here and we distribute and then we react, then that might end up being the case. That might end up being where we, end up dumping off and selling off, right? So we'll see. We'll see what ends up going down here, right? Again, like we do have imbalance that has yet to be filled, right? So even if we are bullish, like, there could still be a chance that at some point we break order flow just to go for that and then we go higher. I don't really think that likelihood of that is there right now, given all the previous price action, given that the structure has been looking really bullish. But yeah, that's really the main zones I'm looking at for you guys this week. All right. So that's what I'm thinking there for dollar, right? And obviously, relative to that, we have things like EU, right, that I think can potentially continue to go down, right? I wouldn't call this an accumulation yet. So yeah, I think that EU could potentially continue to go down, things like GU as well, barely reached its zone, but I do think it does look like it's going to come a little lower. We see how, we did have a buy from that area, but we can see how fast it was and also how short-lived it was, when it came to that buy, right? So for me, this is not really looking too strong. That looks a lot more like it could be just like manipulation, kind of going to hunt for orders as opposed to, real strength in the market, right? So I'm kind of thinking that like this area could end up being a zone where we end up seeing price, get back up into before we go ahead and sell off on GU. So if I were to look for the buys on dollar this week, I think this area here on GU is really not bad at all for kind of like a redistribution idea. And then, when we look at things like EU, honestly, again, like when it comes to EU, I mean, I don't really like these highs all that much. So if price pulled back here, I probably wouldn't look for the push down. I would want to see just like with last week, like that we actually go ahead and sweep and then we redistribute and stuff. That's what I would like better. But I don't know if we'll get this, but that's what I would personally like better, for something like EU, right? So, for EU, if we're gonna sweep the whole thing, then look for that to be like an institutional candle reaction, and then we look for the retest of that institutional candle to see if this can end up being a redistribution, right? So that's what I prefer with EU. Clear up some of the liquidity up top. NU again, just super bearish, right? Just absolutely tanking, right? Even when we look at the weekly, big buy to sell motion. I mean, no real signs of stopping, right? We do go into an order block here, it looks like this week. We'll see if that ends up being, where we buy from. Could be the case if this ends up, wanting to be like an internal sweep on liquidity there on the weekly. We'll definitely pay attention to the zone. But again, like our bias is dollar long after that long accumulation that we spoke about on the daily that we've been kind of playing around with for a while. So we're just going to continue to go with that. And look for dollar to break these the high of this accumulation, which is all the way up here at 101, or sorry, at 102 basically. So only time will tell. Only time will tell. But yeah, that's kind of currencies in general. Again, just kind of looking to align with that when it comes to UJ. UJ is going to have a similar setup to the dollar. If dollar goes down into its imbalance, UJ will sweep its low and go into its own imbalance. And then we go higher, right? This is where my entry is over here. So as long as we can hold that low there, I'm not going to really need to enter again. I'm just going to hold the same zone. And then hopefully at some point we can see the market, basically continue, and potentially make a new higher high, in the market. So we should, we shall see. That's all right. That's really it for currency in general. All right. We already spoke about gold. Oh no, we didn't speak about gold. Sorry. So gold, like I said last week, we started looking for longs. And I do think that we could potentially still be in that mindset, right? Looking at this previous daily down move, right? We can see that it traded perfectly into this daily down candle here as well. So I do wonder if that push to the downside can end up being a nice little bottom for us to just hold order flow and continue to go higher. If that's the case, right? Maybe we see pullbacks back into that daily low to go ahead and give us, like another push up, right? So maybe if this next daily candle gives us a wick down or something like that, or even runs the low of this wick, right? Then maybe we end up seeing the next move push to the upside. I think there's a chance for a recovery here. I do think so. Granted, like here on the daily, it's not the best. Like we don't really have like, a really nice institutional candle there on the daily. Let's see here with gold, right? Gold has a better candle, but yeah, not great. But yeah, in general, again, it's like we still see structure holding, right? So, even with gold, it's like we had that manipulation that happened, down there, right? We had the new high, we had price pulling back, right? We created, another point of structure there with manipulation. We made another high, right? And then this is where we called out the buys from last week, right? So again, the structure is still bullish, even though we've pulled back here. We doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to look for a reversal just because, we got above previous highs or anything, right? For me, this still looks like we can potentially continue the order flow, right? Ideally for me with gold, I think seeing us go down here, breaking below this wick, we can then go ahead and look for the longs to happen, this coming week, right? And then, silver as well, same kind of vibe, right? Either one, holding that low, or two, we end up breaking it, and, using that as a point of liquidity, to go ahead and push it, higher, right? So that's still the mindset I'm in, guys. I think the structure is bullish. I think the candles are still pretty bullish. I like how fast this push to the downside was. That's pretty, indicative of reaccumulations and stuff. So I do think that that's what happened. I think that we reaccumulated last week. And so, I think that gold should continue and, silver should continue as well. I just think gold could maybe do without that wick there. So maybe we can clean up this wick and then go ahead and sweep it and come higher. But as for silver, silver's good. Silver already kind of swept through right there. So maybe we just retest on silver and then go long, right? Tough to say. That's the 1 hour, so I'm not really too sure. But yeah, we'll see how that ends up going there with gold and silver. Okay, so we got gold, silver. All right, we did indices as well, right? So like I said, guys, gold and silver metals, I'm still looking for buys, not really looking for sells at the moment. And we'll see how things go. Now, indices we spoke about what we're looking for, and then crypto, right? So now crypto we have again, like here in the market, I ended up looking for a buy from this level, right? We had kind of like a internal sweep on lows, right? So we had this low here that was just barely swept with this push to the downside there. We had a really nice institutional down candle. So I went ahead and took a type 3 entry, on this idea, right? And so, I ended up catching a really nice buy up towards these levels. And then we just reaccumulated again, to be honest, right? We saw price distribute, we came down, we went below the lows of the distribution, and we accumulated. And since then, we've really been holding that structure. So right now, the structure is bullish, right? When it comes to just this last little bit. That being said, I also do think it's kind of almost looking like a creek, right? I'm wondering if there can be some potential for a redistribution to come in on BTC because last week we had an accumulation here and we distributed up into here, right? So is it possible that like, in this coming week, maybe even today that we end up getting a nice, UTAT happening here on BTC? So personally, guys, this is a call out. I think that might happen today. And I would look to basically see if BTC can hold this level up here, above, basically around 68 would be nice, if we could get there, but really just above this big wick that happened here and see if we can create like an institutional candle, something like that, that can go ahead and sweep up into this previous redistribution. And maybe from there we end up going lower. Honestly, I do think that below 65, below 60 makes sense in general. So, like in terms of if we're going to see the long-term move on BTC happen to come back up. Granted, if you're holding BTC or whatever, I wouldn't like sell, obviously. I think that we're still bullish. I don't think that, I think that right now we're just probably going to look to sell off and take out some buyers because, again, we're just seeing redistribution after redistribution, right? We have this big buy to sell motion, right? We get a clean redistribution right here, right? And then we come down, we make a new low, we get another redistribution here, right? And then right now it's possible that, again, like, we still haven't broken this low of the redistribution. So if we can get price to retest, right, I think that we can start to head towards 65 really. We start to head towards 65 really quickly, right? So for me, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Granted, if we do end up breaking through here, then that's going to change the narrative for me. That's going to show a change in order flow. So then at that point, maybe from there, we end up, hopefully pulling back to give us a buy, opportunity. But personally, guys, I am leaning towards the shorts here, on, Bitcoin. All right. Damn, it's only been like 30 minutes or so. Yeah, I mean, honestly, guys, I've gone through everything here, pretty much that we can go through. Not really too much else. I think the only other thing that we spoke about last week was this weekly trap candle here on NZD CAD. So yeah, somebody asked us to look at NZD CAD. Oh, it looks like we looked at UJ here. Downside here, reaccumulated again here with that push to the downside, and then now last week we have price has been behaving as we get into that zone. It looks very bullish. It looks very strong. It looks like okay, cool. So this is where we called out UJ. So we did say that this push to the downside here made it look very bullish. We had a nice daily down candle, and then boom, we traded down into those lows before buying up. And yeah, I believe we did speak about NZD CAD here, right, where we had distributions take place, right? So I mean, honestly, this is looking kind of bearish to me at the moment. We have a very same as with dollars. I mean, not bad. So yeah, really that's what we were expecting was for NZD CAD to start to come lower there. When we look at the daily, that is what happened, right? So we spoke about this daily up candle right here on the call, I believe. Right. Yeah, sure. Again, I do think though lots of wicks to the downside here, right? When we see like this wick here, right? That wick there, that wick there. I mean, here we have a solid candle at least. But I do think that we also have this solid up candle here. Combine that with the fact that we have a weekly trap. I do think the most likely scenario is bearish, right? So yeah, again, we spoke about the daily up candle. We spoke about the weekly trap candle right here. We see this weekly trap candle there. We spoke about how we had a lot of wicks to the downside, so most likely that wasn't going to hold. And look at where we are, right? Really, really nice moves down from that level. I believe the market opened up here, right? The market opened up right here. And, we had the market trade up, kind of take out some highs, and then boom, sold off, right? So that's kind of what we were expecting in general, for NZD CAD. So yeah, really clean stuff, really clean stuff. Um, Distribution forming on the 2 hour/4 hour on dollar. Let me take a look for you. So could be the case, could be the case. Right now, the order flow is still bullish at the moment. If we do look at it like, first drive, second drive, third drive, maybe. But remember, like, even distributions look like uptrends, right? And like, uptrends can look like distributions too, right? So what do we typically look at when it comes to, really seeing, is this an uptrend or is it a distribution, right? And for me, it's like when we get the things like we have here, like manipulations of lows, right? Coming back into those really nicely, right? Creating like good accumulations in good areas. I lean towards trend, right? It could be the case, right? It could be the case. Again, we'll find out when price gets up here. Like I said, this is the devil's advocate play. If we do start to distribute in this area, then that's going to be all right. Maybe we actually do get that being a UTAD and then we sell off, right? We did speak about the fact that there could be sells that happen from this area. So yeah, maybe that's the case, right? At the moment, though, when it comes to the evidence that we've really seen, I would say that the evidence that we've really seen is definitely more bullish than it is bearish, right? Lows creating new highs, lows creating new highs, lows, not new high yet, but we had a nice push, right? So it's like all those lows have signs of manipulation inside of them. That's the kind of stuff that I will look at to potentially, continue the trend as opposed to it being necessarily a distribution. But like I said, we'll find out when we see the price action in this level. Personally, like I said, what I'm leaning towards is if we can hold these highs, come back down to here, I think this could be a good buy zone and then go ahead and bring us up to new highs, potentially, right? So fingers crossed. Like I said, I am still in UJ. So the fact that I'm still in buys on UJ should tell you guys where I'm at, in terms of bullish or bearish, right? And I do think that we look pretty bullish, right, guys? But yeah, guys, that's pretty much that for today. All right, let's see how some of these pairs end up playing out for us. Let's see what ends up, coming in for the markets, right? Last week was a profitable week. Hopefully it was for you guys as well. And yeah, without further ado, I'll go ahead and end the call. All right, appreciate you guys once again. And for being on the recording and also for those of you guys that are here live. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right, guys, much love, much appreciation. Peace out.